Warm greetings, friends. Warm greetings. If everyone could please, we just reconnect to our motivation. Bring a deep sense of gratitude and kind of refreshed, present joyfulness to being able to come together and reflect on the teachings of the Buddha and Guru Rinpoche and the lineage masters and to put them into practice. So bring up that really deep, heartfelt kind of sense of appreciation for the opportunity. And then in addition to that, really have this motivation that all the benefit that comes from doing that, connecting to these teachings and applying them in our lives, that the benefit really immediately benefits and goes out to all beings everywhere, every single one, and provides them with whatever they need to be happy. And then ultimately whatever they need to be completely free and achieve enlightenment. So awaken that bodhicitta view, actual experience, and then thirdly, this pure view of Vajrayana, to see that everything is naturally divine. All the forms, sounds, and thoughts, emotions, movements of mind, they're all naturally, just as they are, fine, natural, pure. So trying to see this view, kind of bring up that, activate that kind of sense of, pure view in our minds right now. And with this renunciation, bodhicitta, and a pure view, we'll kind of really take a moment to enliven that. Thank you. It's always a really humbling experience to get to be here and say something about Dharma. It's like such a tremendous, really big responsibility. And I'm always just in way over my head because the Dharma is so vast and profound. So that's just the reality of it. And then kind of fulfilling the request, Venerable Khenpo Rinpoche, to kind of be here for these ongoing Dudjom Tersar Ngondro practices with kind of little introductory remarks. So kind of trying to fulfill that to my best capabilities and just kind of, with really good intentions. So trying to reactivate that myself. And then each time it's kind of seen, I kind of feel this kind of pressure of it to, what to offer this time, what's going to be really helpful. And that's always, I take that kind of question seriously for myself. So I didn't really know this time. It's kind of a little difficult. And I kind of honed in on something, but I'm kind of always trying to think in my mind, what could really be helpful? Amidst all the teachings that these great noble beings have taught, and all these books, all these opportunities we have to connect to the Dharma, what would be helpful now? And so it kind of becomes a question of what supports are there that for people beginning on the path, continuing on the path, what's been helpful for me? Because it's involved. To open the heart is really involved, and to be vulnerable and available and sensitive and humble, and to try to be receptive and responsive to circumstances, to people. As we all go through our ups and downs and have different moods and inspirations and difficulties come up, it's what's helpful, what serves is a really big bodhisattva question, and something that I've connected with for years, just in this small little, baby steps I've taken on the path, is these 4 reliances. So that's kind of the main topic I thought to just kind of reflect on a little bit in our brief time together, is the 4 reliances taught by the Buddha. And these are essential foundational teachings, honored and held, maintained from the foundational Buddhism all the way up through Tibetan Buddhism. And the Buddha is said to have taught this in the Sutra of Inexhaustible Knowledge, these 4 reliances. And they're kind of, to some degree, just today is like to think of all the great variety and the richness of that the Buddha's teachings offer. 84,000 teachings and the millions of tantras, like kind of to have some keys that'll help unlock or kind of distill some essential, fundamental kind of first principles or like really key points that amidst all the variety we can always come back to and rely on and trust in, that they're reliable. So here, this topic is the 4 reliances. And just kind of a lot of this talk, kind of in just this idea that I'm referring to, comes from Venerable Khenpo Rinpoches. They discuss this in many of their books, especially in their Shedra series. The Rangtong Shentong Views book, they talk about the 4 reliances. Then also in their Outer Tantras, their Outer Tantra commentary, opening the door to the Outer Tantras, as well as the Gyu Garba book. So there's a lot of teachings on the 4 reliances and what these are, and our own teachers, Venerable Khenpo Rinpoches, have taught them. They've emphasized the importance of these teachings quite a lot. And so this is just a little peeking into a door that goes into a vast terrain and territory. So that's well worth kind of going into further. We're just kind of a little peeking through into that door today. And so the first reliance is don't rely on the teacher, rely on the teachings. The second reliance is don't rely on the words, rely on the meaning. The third reliance is don't rely on the provisional meaning or the interpretable meaning, but rely on the definitive meaning. And then fourthly, the fourth reliance is don't rely on conceptual mind, but rely on wisdom awareness. So these are the 4 reliances that the Buddha taught us. What is worthy of our trust, of reliance? Don't rely on the teacher, but the teachings. Don't rely on the words, but their meaning. Not the provisional meaning, but the definitive meaning. And not our conceptual mind, our dualistic kind of mind, but our wisdom awareness. These are the 4 reliances. Then I find this is like a way to go deeper and deeper into the teachings and to let ourselves absorb these teachings more richly, more thoroughly. So this first reliance, don't rely on the teacher, but the teachings. Then here, this is like such a big teaching that the Buddha taught. That to not trust in the validity of something just because a famous person said it, or a charismatic person, or they're beautiful or popular, renowned, alleged expert, or it's like a very popular opinion. But look for yourself. Really test it. Test the validity, not just based on someone who has a position of authority or a position of power, but really look for yourself. That this is so important to kind of, as Buddhists, to go beyond the idea that, we just kind of always put blind faith in someone else and just say yes. That the Buddha was so clear that this is not how the path of enlightenment or liberation happens. We really have to do this process of awakening ourselves. Our own mind has to wake up. Our own heart has to open up. And so we really fully have to engage this process. And while having great guides like the Buddha is so important and can save us so much time and so much wasted time by having a real expert kind of give us key points to look after, like the 4 reliances, then we really still have to apply them for ourselves. Just as Buddhists, it's good to emphasize that point and kind of keep coming back. This has to be a lived experience of one's own self. We're not worshiping anyone. This is not a theistic path. We're relying on other testimony and other advice, but we're always testing it for ourselves and our own experience and with our own logic. Trying to use all our faculties to really see for ourselves what's the truth. So what's the Dharma? So this is the first reliance. I'm doing these very quickly. Don't rely on the teacher, but the teaching. The Dharma is what's principal. Then secondly, don't just rely on the words of the teaching, but go into the meaning of the words. And here we have to open up our inquiry. We can't just rely on a literal meaning of words. We can't just repeat something like a parrot. We can't just give the most obvious. It's the most obvious and tangible isn't necessarily the most true. The Buddha is saying there's much more subtle levels of meaning in the teachings. And we have to keep looking and keep opening ourselves to those subtler levels of meaning and to see in those more and more subtle ways. Not as obvious, not as literal. We need to see some of the implicit meaning. And that's a lot of work to really try to look at a topic, look at teachings from various angles. This contemplation is really required of us to really reflect things and test them and see if they're true and see if the opposite is true and really debate the teaching and try it on for ourselves. That the Buddha's asking us to do that, to really engage the teaching, not just as a kind of something we just believe in, like, oh, blind faith to a text now. Not a teacher, but a text. Just believe in the text. The Buddha said, no, there's so many levels of meaning to these texts. And we have to really get more of a faculty for going deeper into the meaning. And then we need to have that question of how can I access deeper levels of meaning and how can I assess them, the validity of those deeper levels. It's not enough just to go deeper. We have to still make sense of it. It's not enough to see subtler patterns. We have to actually make sense of them. How do I interpret these subtler patterns? And then, so that leads us to the third reliance. Don't rely on just the provisional meaning, but rely on the definitive meaning. And this is a big topic in Buddhism. What does provisional mean, or interpretable? It means that the Buddha wasn't saying it the way enlightened beings see things. They were kind of dumbing it down a little bit, or kind of making it a little more digestible. Dzogchen Khenpo Rinpoche sometimes jokingly called these Cinderella stories. The Buddha told us stories that fit more easily with our habitual expectations and our habits, so that it would be easier for us to digest them. These truths, the provisional truths. It only is true up to a certain point. It's partially true. And once we get to that point, then that edge of the context where it's relevant, that truth, then all of a sudden, that truth becomes, we see a limit of the truth, a limit of a position. And this is very much goes and is related to middle way Madhyamaka teachings. On the relative level, any position, any standpoint, any boundary we make, there's something that it leaves out. It always has an opposite. It always omits. And in that omission is a distortion. We need to make healthy boundaries. We need to have healthy definitions, really clear-minded thinking and very kind of grounded feeling. But any time we orient in a certain way, there's some way we're not orienting. So we're leaving something out, or we're highlighting one part at the expense of another. It's just how relative reality works. It's how duality mind functions. And so all these are provisional. That's provisional. Only goes so far. A truth that only is true to an extent, contextually true. So it's context-bound truth. And so then definitive truth would be true in all cases. Or true that the way an enlightened, fully realized being experiences things unmistakably. They're not having to present it in a way that suits sentient beings' needs and views and dispositions. They're just saying the truth as it is unmistakably, the way it's experienced from an awakened, enlightened perspective. This is a definitive teaching. So in this level of the reliances, not the provisional meaning, but the definitive one, here we can see that assumed in this, there's a spectrum of relative truths. In relative reality, everything is partially true, but there is a sequence of partial truths that get less and less partially true, or more and more fully true, until they're definitive. So this is a big point. That it's saying that not all opinions are equal. That what's helpful, what's true, is always context bound, but certain truths are more true than others. They include more truth. They have a bigger, more inclusive context. They include more evidence. They're more well tested. There's more testimony. There's better data. There's a spectrum of truths. This is all on relative level. And eventually that leads us into definitive truth. So here it's positing there is a definitive truth, the way that an unmistaken way of experiencing reality. And this leads us to the fourth reliance. Rely on wisdom awareness, not on conceptual mind. It's saying the only way to experience definitive truth is through wisdom, prajna, wisdom awareness, not just duality, conceptual mind, intellectual argumentation, kind of relative positions of any kind, but to see the unchanging nature of wisdom awareness. That's the fourth reliance, to use our own wisdom as the way we engage all of our experience, that eventually that's where the path is leading us. We're relying on our wisdom from moment to moment to moment to moment, not our kind of fabricated duality mind that always has opinions and preferences and just by nature excludes things, but our wisdom. The wisdom to see beyond this exclusionary way of experiencing things. Wisdom. So that again is a very big topic to distinguish between Sam and Rigpa, or conceptual mind and non-conceptual wisdom. It's such a big topic. But this is where the path is leading us. To wisdom, our own wisdom, showing us our own wisdom, our own open mind. And here we can see that the Buddha who taught this some 2,600 years ago was so ahead of his time. He's still ahead of our times. He's so amazingly, radically awakened. I mean, he's so far beyond. That we all have this wisdom awareness. It can see definitive truth. It can see relative truth with all of its variety and distinctions so precisely and so clearly. It can see the literal truth. And it can see all the different types of authorities, all the different people to believe in, the different types of testimonies. The Buddha can see all of this, and he's giving us a path step by step with what we can rely on so that we can eventually come down to really like seeing for ourselves the way reality is. And not at the exclusion of our relationships, but by using them, by using what we experience to go deeper, to open up more, to absorb more. So these are the four reliances taught by the extraordinary, gracious, so kind, compassionately wise Buddha. It's been upheld in all the traditions of Buddhism, these foundational teachings in all of Sutra Mahayana and Tantra Mahayana. And then here we get into this next kind of set or series of kind of clear distinctions when we look at this third reliance of provisional and definitive. Not provisional truth, but definitive. And this is something I just wanted to quickly mention. It's like such a big doorway or entry into like such a vast, amazingly special landscape of Vajrayana. And that's what's talked about often by these great masters, including Venerable Khenpo Rinpoches, is the 6 limits and the 4 codes. These are very renowned Vajrayana teachings. They're ways of assessing the meaning of the Vajrayana pith instructions accurately and like opening the meaning more and more vastly, more deeply, so that our practice and our path can be more thorough. The 4 codes, the 6 limits. Venerable Khenpo Rinpoches, they mention these in almost each of their Shedra books. And it's just like a little keyway that can like kind of locate an experience or a view a little more kind of like fully so that we can unpack the meaning and like utilize it a little more easily. So these are like keys. They're not like more numerical number things just to remember and get more confused by. They're actually like these distilled essential kind of keys that unlock or open the kind of deeper meanings of all these teachings. And then specifically this is related to Vajrayana or the Tantra in Buddhism. And first, the 4 codes. This also was taught by His Holiness the Dalai Lama in a book of his and published in 1995 called World of Tibetan Buddhism, an overview of its philosophy and practice. That's by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So this is some 26 years ago in English. These teachings on 4 codes and 6 limits are not new. Buddha taught them a long time ago. They've been published in English language for English speakers for quite some time now. So this is all readily available to look more into if we want to. And so these 4 codes to begin with is like said to be the word meaning is the first. And then the second is a general meaning. The third is the hidden meaning. And the fourth is the ultimate meaning. And these are levels of meaning in the Tantras. The word meaning, general meaning, hidden meaning, ultimate meaning. We can apply this to Ngondro practice. We can apply this to any Tibetan Buddhist teaching. And here, Khenpo Rinpoches, in 2 of their books on the great noble lady Tara, Smile of Sun and Moon and Tara's Enlightened Activity, they go through these 4 codes and 6 limits very extensively. And specifically in these 2 Tara books, the whole book is designed, or each of these books, they're both designed around these 4 codes, the 4 levels of meaning of the 21 praises of Tara. Word meaning, general, hidden, and ultimate. That's what each of the chapters, it breaks into these 4 ways of understanding, unpacking, unlocking, accessing the meaning of the teachings in our own experience. So this is a very renowned way to understand teachings. And the word meaning is just a literal meaning. What do the words specifically say? It's very zoomed in and very specific. And then the second, and I'm just going through this really quickly. The second meaning is a general meaning. It takes a much broader view of the specific text that we're looking at, the pith instruction. Where does it fit in all the range of the Buddha's teachings? What's the general theme of the teaching? Not just the words or the phrase or the exact pinpoint essence, but like kind of the broader stroke, more bird's eye view meaning. And then thirdly, the hidden meaning. This is now it gets again into these different levels or layers of more and more subtle meaning that they correspond to more and more subtle views. When we refine our views, then certain levels of meaning open up to us. And we start seeing them as well. And there's many ways, there's in the Tantras, there's six levels, 6 yanas of Tantras. Each of them goes into a more hidden meaning. And then fourthly, the ultimate meaning. And Rinpoche said this is like the Dzogchen or Mahamudra, these like highest unexcelled Tantras, the like peak, the highest view of the ultimate nature. So this is more related to wisdom awareness. So each pith instruction can be understood in these 4 ways. And then in Rinpoche's books is 2 Tara books. The way they kind of explicitly talking about the 4 codes is more like the word meaning is like specifically to the text according to the outer Tantra view, the word meaning. And then the general meaning they're saying is more according to Mahayoga understanding, of visualization practice. And then the third, the hidden meaning, is the Anuyoga approach of creation, of completion stage with characteristics, or by holding on to certain forms. And then fourthly, the ultimate meaning is Dzogchen, completion without characteristics, not relying on anything provisional, just complete awakened awareness. These are 4 codes, 4 ways that we can, just like a basic frame we can use to open deeper and deeper levels of a teaching in our experience. So it's like another, tool we can have to kind of unlock some of the meaning in our experience, of the Tantras, to illuminate a little bit. And then the 6 limits. Going to that, this is also covered in His Holiness's book, and many of Rinpoche's Shedra books too. And then they're similar to kind of what we've been discussing for so far. There's 3 sets of kind of opposites in a way. The first 2 limits are the provisional and definitive meanings. So we've kind of briefly discussed those. So in a Tantra, what's a provisional meaning? What's a definitive meaning? And then the next 2 are the intended meaning and the unintended meaning. So this is kind of like a little bit more like what was you could say the basic intention of offering the teaching or giving the teaching. And then what is the unintended or the not as easily recognizable intention of the Buddha saying something, or of a Tantra being, written in a certain way. What's a little easier is it's like a parent with a child. They might give a reason that a child shouldn't do something, and it's not so much for the reason, but it's for another reason. They're trying to help the child. The child can't understand, that you can't just only eat ice cream, So they give some other reason. Like if you eat too much ice cream, you'll just turn into a big vat of ice cream. There's all different ways where the Buddha could teach one thing, like recite a mani mantra once and you'll purify all these countless eons, so many eons of negative karma. Then there's different levels. We kind of locate that. It's a provisional teaching or definitive, and it's provisional. Is it true in what way, at what level? So this is kind of what this is helping us unpack a little bit. We have to ask ourselves these questions. And then the third set is, again, we've discussed before, the third set of the 6 limits is literal and non-literal. The literal and non-literal meanings. So we have the provisional and definitive, the intended and unintended, and the literal and the non-literal. So this is all to say that the Tantras are a very sophisticated system, and Buddhism in general with the 4 reliances. If we just think that the Buddha is just giving some blind faith belief, this is so thoroughly refuted by the Buddha's actual teachings. We look at these 4 reliances, 4 codes, 6 limits. We can clearly see in the Buddha's own words, and all that have been just repeated so much for centuries by these masters. This is not the way Buddhism works. Which is a big point. Even unpacking these 4 codes and 6 limits, there's different ways to do it. It's a provisional teaching too. Buddha was such a genius. Okay, so in the Guhyagarbha Tantra, which Rinpoches teach in their Outer Tantra book, they unpack the 6 limits in a totally different way. And they say this is one of the other really renowned ways of understanding the 6 limits. Here I'm just looking at notes, So in the Guhyagarbha Tantra, the first limit is the view, the union of relative and absolute truths. We have to have that view. That's the first. And here the Rinpoches say that the word limit, it's ta, T-H-A, it's not translated as limit, it's translated as foundation or necessity or base. What are the 6 foundations? First foundation is the unmistaken view of the union of relative and absolute truth. That's one foundation we have to correctly understand the Tantras. This is a different way to unpack the 6 limits. The second one is conduct. We have to apply conduct, behavior that opens or like really emphasizes or makes even more brilliant that same view. Our conduct has to illuminate our view and expand it. Then thirdly, we follow samayas and commitments properly. That's the third limit, the third foundation or necessity. The fourth is we have to go step by step, receiving the appropriate empowerments in the right sequence and unlocking the meaning of the teaching thoroughly, step by step, in order to properly understand and experience the Tantras. And fifth, concentration or our samadhi. Basically, this Rinpoches are saying, all of this process has to be facilitated through our meditation practice. We can't access these deeper meanings just on an intellectual level alone. We have to perform it. We have to transform our way of understanding. We have to refine our awareness. And that happens through meditation, not just study alone or contemplation. We have to put it into practice. That's the only way these deeper meanings are going to unlock in our experience in a reliable, steady way, where they can be really change the way we are and not just be some flash experience we had once and then it's gone. And then the sixth limit is it has to follow the lineage pith instructions to correctly understand and absorb, to access the meaning of the Tantras. It has to be an authentic lineage, and it has to go through authentic lineage pith instructions. These are the 6 foundations to correctly understand the Tantras. View, conduct, follow the samayas, proceed gradually, step by step in our experience to open up the awakening with meditation according to the lineage pith instructions. It's the only correct way to understand the Tantras taught by the Buddha. Then there's even a third way to understand the 6 limits. Here I'm throwing something out just to appreciate the beauty of the Buddha's teachings. This can all be applied to the Ngondro, how we understand our Ngondro practice. The third way to understand the 6 limits, which Khenpo Rinpoche say is another very renowned way of understanding them, and they cover it extensively in the Outer Tantras, their Outer Tantra Shedra book. The first is like the first thing we have to rely on of the 6 limits. The first one is instruction manuals. Actual guidebooks, tantric guidebooks by qualified teachers. So then, how do we learn the instruction manual? We have to follow a qualified guru. That's the second limit. Then how does a Lama become qualified? They have to have the pith instructions. Not just the intellectual idea of them, and then not just not a hunch. They have to be upholding and preserving those instructions received in a living lineage. Then fourthly, to some degree, they have to have actualized or directly experienced the meaning of the pith instructions in their own experience through their own practice. This is a foundation to understand the Tantras. Then fifthly, that realization, that guide that we're relying on, that realization has to come through practice. It has to be practiced in order for the realization to happen. The transformation can't be just thought about. It has to be undergone. And then finally, the result, it comes down to like the result of enlightenment. That they receive these pith instructions themselves from their qualified teacher in an uncorrupted, authentic lineage that's preserved the Pitta instructions in these instruction manuals. And they put it into practice themselves and got some degree of realization, and they kept practicing it. And then they became reliable guides for other people, for other beings like myself, just sentient beings, to actually learn, to access the meaning of something as so vastly profound and complex and beautiful and simple as the Dudjom Tersar Ngondro. And these great masters have done all that work. And we have ways of making sense of why we should rely on a teacher. When the four reliances, the outer level of the teachings, the Buddha said, don't rely on the teacher, rely on the teaching. And as we keep applying that and testing for ourselves, and we get into more and more subtle territory, and our mind gets more and more refined, and the extent of cause and effect becomes more and more on our radar, the vast mystery of cause and effect. As the deeper we get, the more we need a teacher, the more we need a guide, and the more capable we are of discerning the guidance and really correctly locating the guidance and asking for help when we need help. So here the teachings say you really begin with being very skeptical. Look for yourself. Use logic. Use inference. Look at the scriptures. Look at what all these masters have said. And as our practice deepens and our kind of intellectual intelligence gets more kind of clarified, we have to go beyond logic. We have to go beyond kind of conceptual mind, especially if we get into things like Tantra, where the first limit is to rely on a view, unmistaken view of the union of relative and absolute truth. And we need a teacher to receive these instructions. And we need to be able to discern teachers, and we need to be able to discern our own qualities as students. And we have to be humble, honest with ourselves about that, and willing to receive feedback. And that's a very involved process. So we need to really bring the A game. We need to bring everything that we can from our own side, and be receptive and curious and keep learning, but also courageous, and have really healthy kind of abilities to distinguish and define. And it comes down to it every time, we have to actually apply them to our own minds, our own hearts. We have to live it. The Dharma has to be lived. That's why if we look at how these kind of four reliances unfold, the four codes, the 6 limits, we can see how people can understand, Buddhism is a religion. Then it goes deeper and becomes a philosophy. Then it goes deeper and it becomes a way of life. Then it goes deeper and it becomes an uninterrupted living experience of how wisdom beings, how sage-like beings, experience all of reality from moment to moment, and all the different ways that it can be experienced, the vast spectrum of cause and effect, and the vast spectrum of views that beings can take. This is all Buddhism. And so I wanted to just take a little time, not to just throw out a lot of different numerical systems, but to just also honor, to pause and in a way honor, the richness of the Buddha's teachings. And not just the richness, but the Buddha gave us these methods, these codes, these keys to unlock the meaning more deeply in ourselves and our experience. The Buddha gave us all these systems of inquiry, but we have to apply them ourselves. And it's such a wonderful opportunity we have. It's such a wonderful opportunity that I come across things like this and teachings by Khenpo Rinpoches and the Buddha, and it's so much nuance. It's just been there all along, and it's been preserved. If we get tired of the same old, back and forth, black and white, kind of brutal wrestling that's been kind of somehow become a norm, the norm of how people are supposed to be, then we can look to things like Buddhism, has such a rich living tradition that goes so much deeper than just this either or kind of thinking. And it really asks us to bring our full Buddha nature out from hiding, and to reveal it for our own benefit and the benefit of others, both now and long into the future. I'm so just utterly amazed every time by the Buddha's teachings. They just go so deep. And it's so open. And then it leads to just such naturalness. Not anything just overly complicated for its own sake, but it's just more helpful. So we can kind of zoom in and be with each other, kind of tune into each other more skillfully and simply. And to just write what's right at that time with someone we're with. Then we can kind of zoom out and flexibly engage our experience as it keeps changing in a different way that's really context sensitive and really helpful. So I hope some of this is helpful, at least as little doorways to peek into these really deep, profound teachings. Of course, there's so much more to say about these things, and it's just a very extensive, big topic. The Tantras in general, of course, but then also just these methods of unlocking their utter brilliance. So thanks so much. Appreciate the time, really. And then we'll go into the practice of the Dudjom Tersar Ngondro. So really, thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much. I hope it was helpful just to have a little quick kind of turbo summary of topics that are super profound. 4 reliances, 4 codes, 6 limits. Kind of what all these are orienting towards is that the teachings, as we kind of keep working with them and keep kind of absorbing them and becoming receptive to the Dharma, that it deepens and we deepen. And our relationship to our guide, our guru, and our community, it all deepens. And so this is really, hopefully, it's there are kind of a few little kind of ways of seeing that depth and that beauty in the teachings, in ourselves, in our kind of amongst our qualified teachers. You can see how just a quick survey of these 6 limits is 3 different ways of seeing how the teachings go deeper, and then how our experience of our view and our practice and conduct, it all goes deeper. And how our relationship with a qualified Lama as the 6 foundations, that deepens, and what's required to actually be in that position, to hold that kind of wisdom and transmit it. So hopefully this is kind of a little encouraging of when the richness of the Dharma is so vast and profound, there's a next opening. There's a next step. And the Buddha taught this sequence of steps, not in some kind of rigid, kind of heavy-handed way, but just as a natural unfolding. That things become naturally more compassionate, naturally more wise as we keep applying the teachings in our lives. So I hope that was clear in just the brief little time I took to go over that. So I really genuinely hope that was helpful.